Money doesn't just come from one place. It drips, trickles, flows, and floods into our lives in different ways. Welcome to Drip Trickle Flow Flood, a podcast that explores the power of multiple income streams. Hey, Tony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. You look like you got some sun.
Yeah, I got a little sunburn over the 4th of July. I did not take the sage advice of wearing sunscreen, but it was a fun weekend. How was your 4th?
Yeah, it was good. We went out to a friend's cabin that's closer to Mount Baker, which is for our listeners out in Washington State, because our dogs are not great with fireworks, and our neighbors on our street, like literally our next door neighbor, set them off for many hours on 4th of July. And it's like right on top of your head. So we try to get away from it. So we went out there and we just heard like distant boom booms, but nothing super close. So the dogs were
Yeah, I had a dog that we would have to leave the TV on all night so that she couldn't hear it. Our current dog doesn't care at all, so
that's
that's
great.
nice. And actually, we ship her off though. We go to a camp out, so she actually went out with my parents all weekend. And
Oh, okay. There probably wasn't too many out where your parents are because they're close to where we were staying. Thanks.
yeah,
Awesome. We have a fun question that we're going to dig into today in this solo episode. So the question is, should you pay off your mortgage early or invest the extra? So I think there's a lot of facets to this question, but I'm curious what your like knee-jerk reaction is to that question.
yeah. Obviously, like everything, it does depend. Lately, or not lately, a lot of the mortgages that people are currently holding are really low interest rates. And so the idea of paying those off and investing, the idea of paying those off instead of investing elsewhere, if you got a mortgage rate that's 3 or even 4%, it's really hard to not think you couldn't go get more money somewhere else and outperform that interest rate. If you're getting if you're getting a loan right now and you're paying 6, 7, maybe even 8%, if you're looking at investment properties or commercial properties, now you got to really think about it. Can I outperform that? And if I can, what are the risks involved with outperforming that rate? So the answer is going to probably be different for different people and their situation, but it's really, if you're going to create a formula, it's a question of both the math and the risk. Obviously, if you're paying off your mortgage, you're making 3% on your money, which obviously doesn't do much when you're trying to battle high inflation. But what's your take on paying off a mortgage?
Yeah, very similar to you in that, like, if you're able to give that money a job of sorts, so if you're investing it in some way, I just always think of it as what's the job that money has when it comes in the door. It's sitting around in an account, which it should never be. It should have some kind of job. So if that is something that you're focused on, and you have an interest rate that's lower, as you mentioned, it probably doesn't make sense to pay it off early. You can have that money work for you in some other way. But if you're somebody with a higher mortgage interest rate and you're also somebody who's not going to give that money a job because of whatever that may be, if it's just life circumstances, if it's time, energy, just right now you don't have the knowledge and you're still acquiring it, then maybe it makes sense to start making those double payments. But it's such a personal decision. I was doing a little research too. There were some threads on Reddit, of course, where Reddit's like my number one research tool and the writer. And I just think people are usually very honest on there because you're anonymous. And one thing that came up a lot on there, which didn't really occur to me necessarily, but I can see where that is the case for a lot of people, is some people wanted to pay it off early, not really because of a financial decision, but more because of a peace of mind decision. It just felt better for them. And that feeling beat out like any potential additional income they could make. So I thought that was interesting because maybe that doesn't occur to me. But again, that's why it's such a personal decision for people.
I totally understand that. You only have so much stress you can take. And so even if you're like, I have these opportunities that I could pursue, and if I had more money, I could pursue them. Maybe it's an investment opportunity, maybe it's buying another piece of real estate, whatever it is. But if you're stressed out about making that payment, you may not have the energy or the mental bandwidth to like take that leap. The other piece is like, what are you doing, right? What is the job of that money? So if you're going to take that money and let's say you're paying 4%, there's probably a lot of people somewhere around there right now, maybe a little bit below, maybe a little bit above. If you're that 4% interest, so if you just pay that off and you're essentially getting 4% on your money, technically, based off what, the Fed is trying to do, you should be outperforming inflation with that money right now. So while 4%, it's a long climb to reach all your financial goals. Potentially, if you're only getting 4% on your money, getting 4% is definitely a respectable rate when it's a sure thing. There's really no risk. You pay that off, you're making more. You're making 4% on that money. The flip side is if you have that money, and right now you can get 4% in a high interest savings account. So to me, if it's a push, I always keep that leveraged money and take the interest. When that changes, then I have to really think about it. Okay, what am I doing with this money? The other thing is looking at equity as a tool. So a lot of people say if you pay off that mortgage, that money's gone, you can't utilize it for anything. And that's not necessarily true. If you're paying down that mortgage and creating the equity you have in your house, you can then potentially go borrow that money back. Now, someone might rebuttal this and say, well, you're only going to get 80% of that back because they're probably only going to give you an 80% loan to value ratio. But maybe that's okay because that money is working as opposed to maybe sitting there saving at a lower interest rate. You're getting that higher interest rate and you're getting the ability to potentially access that equity. So from a HELOC standpoint is something that I've mentioned this in the past. I think maybe it first came up when we were talking to Rhea, who was the banker, and I bring it up a lot. I went through a period of time and I had some pretty big debates with some financial advisors and some other people because basically I would keep $0 in my savings account. And anytime I got $1, I paid down that HELOC. And I knew that meant I was getting 4% or whatever my current rate was. It was a variable rate. And that's just how I always operated. And I just knew that I was always getting that rate and I could re-access that money whenever I wanted. We couple episodes back talked about a Dave Ramsey article, and I'm sure he would hate that idea.
Yes.
But to me, it was a very useful tool that allowed me to leverage myself in a way that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to, and allowed me to grow my net worth in a way that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to.
And in that episode, we talked about debt as a tool, which it is, right? Which is, yes, there are ways you can use that. And that liquidity conversation comes up a lot as well, too, where I think what's the standard advice that you're supposed to keep like 50,000 in a savings account, like for emergency, what's your emergency account?
I don't know what it's like certain number of months or whatever.
A certain number of months, right? And that's accessible it's at your fingertips. But if you don't do that and you give that money a different job, but it's still just as liquid, right? You can access it just as easy. Why not give it that job? That's my philosophy on it. But so I'm not really sure where that's coming from, where it's just stick it in a savings account and let it sit there. And then there's no job for it other than you can just access it quickly when you can access it quickly in other ways, if you do your research.
Yeah, I feel like we're almost trying to protect people as if they're not smart enough to be able to get to that money, or that they'll do something dumb with it instead of putting it in some other vehicle that's still liquid. And I just think we're not giving people enough credit, and I think it's holding people back.
Yeah, it's giving I have cash under my mattress vibes.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I'm
Right,
going to
right.
go blow it on, I don't know, jet ski or
Right,
something.
I'm
I
gonna
don't know.
gamble it
Whatever it
away
is.
or
Yeah.
mhm.
Gamble it away. Yeah. I do think that that idea of people are smart. And I think there's sometimes a lack of financial education that maybe plays into this. But I don't think that means we should not, I don't feel like that's a reason for people to not maximize the power of their money. It just means they need to get more financially educated. And that's, in my opinion, at all stages of life.
Yes, that education is definitely key. And then I also think it's just some of this comes down to your priorities, right? And what we just interviewed Quinn Tempest, where she was talking about seasons of life layering atop the drip, trickle, flow, and flood. And I think that comes into play here too. So your priorities are going to be different at different times. Maybe you are having kids, maybe your kids are going to college, maybe you are looking for a work optional lifestyle. So those factors are all going to play into how you use or not use your debt as a tool.
Yeah. And it might just be, okay, what's the big financial picture? And for me, playing with money is a bit of a game. I was a board game freak when I was a kid, and I just like that strategy. And so for me, it's really fun. For a lot of people, it's not. It's just totally stressful and they don't want to think about it. So if you're the type of person that is actively managing your money and you want to maximize what every dollar's doing and that's fun and enjoyable, then that's great. Other people have a total different model, right? Maybe it's max out your 401k. Maybe they have a pension, which I don't have a pension coming. So I need to
Same.
figure out another route. But so maybe it's the 401k, it's the pension. You got some money in a savings account. And then maybe the next most logical thing is to pay off the mortgage, right? But you're getting this guaranteed return. There's going to be a level of freedom about it. If you were to go to sell it, you're going to get this big flood of money. Maybe you will tap into that equity that you're building and you can use it as a reverse savings account. But if you want to buy an investment property or do something else, you can do that. It's something maybe people don't know. If it's your primary residence that we're talking about here and you pay off that mortgage, if you borrow against your house to then buy an investment property, you're going to be getting a lower interest rate than if you're doing borrowing as an investment property. So there really could be some strategy there as well. If it's an investment property, there's whole other discussions about it and there's tax write-offs associated with it. And at some point, I think we've said this, we need to get an accountant on here to talk
Yes.
to. But yeah, it's not a simple question. And I think it's having that whole financial picture built out and saying, okay, what's the best decision for this money? And just because you're paying off your mortgage early doesn't mean you've got to be throwing all your extra money at it. You could just say, all right, I'm going to do another $100 a month or $1,000 a month or whatever it is. And it's just going to accelerate that. And you can start and stop that at whatever pace you want to do. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
every month.
And that's a good point because that can add up really quickly, even
Mhm.
just an extra $100 a month. And it may not make sense to give that $100 a different job.
Right.
So depending on the person. So it's such a small amount relatively to what you're paying. So that might make the most sense and give the person more peace of mind. And I think it's also there, maybe there's some qualifying questions people can ask themselves, right? Based on what we're discussing here. Obviously, one is what's your mortgage interest rate? So is it like sub 4, or if we're looking at 7%, 6%, that's a different ball game. Are you maxing out your retirement accounts? What's your level of risk? Do you have other high interest debt? What else would you ask?
Yeah, I think maybe it's what's going on in the economic climate, right? And maybe it's you have that little bit of money, extra money every month, and you want to put it down. Or maybe you get a flood, right? Maybe you sell a business, maybe you inherit some money, and there's a level of nervousness around dumping it all into the stock market or whatever because you're not confident in that. So I think analyzing what the other options are is a piece of it. The other piece is, if you really want to get into the weeds, is let's say you have a high interest rate mortgage that you picked up in the last couple of years, and interest rates, now they've been fairly flat lately, but I
Mhm.
think that at least by early next year, there probably will be some cuts. Now you go to okay, do you refinance that? Maybe, but there's a lot of expenses that go along with the refinancing. Yes, over time,
Yes.
it's a great financial decision, but it takes some time to pay off the loan origination fees and all of those things. And if you're sitting there with a chunk of money, maybe instead of refinancing, you are better off to just pay it off. So there's a lot of questions. And I think it's a discussion with, if you have a significant other, having that discussion with them. Does just having that weight off your shoulders just make life that much more enjoyable?
And I think also making sure that is a decision that is actually the way you feel, not to police how people's emotions are, but sometimes these decisions get dribbled down generationally. So
Mm.
I know I've heard that from, for example, where I grew up. It's very much like you buy a house, you pay it off as quickly as you can. And if that's not what you do, then you are deemed not successful, right? It's like that's the only path and the only way. And so sometimes we get those messages dribbled down from parents, grandparents, society, whatever it is. It can be regional, where you grew up. And that's something I think to pay attention to as well. Is this a decision that you're really making, you and or your spouse, if you're partnered with someone and own this home together or have this mortgage together? And just making sure that it fits your beliefs, your values, your numbers, and your goals, and truly your goals, not anybody else's idea of what that is. And I think that's something we try to get across all the time on this podcast, is that all of this is such a personal decision. And it is so important. We have how we do things, you and I, Tony, are different, right? We're different people. We have different families, different goals. And then in some cases, they might be similar as well. But the important thing is that we're leaning into what's meaningful to us and not like what we're taking in from external sources.
Yeah, and I think you can look at it as a bit of a reverse drip trickle flow flood, right? Where that money is flowing out, and what is that impact? There's also like really understanding what your loan, what your mortgage is, right? Do you have mortgage insurance? If you pay down your mortgage to a certain level, does that mortgage insurance goes away? Sometimes it doesn't. So your return on your money might be really good to a certain point. If you can get to that 20% or 25% that might fall off, that might be a great financial decision. Is it a fixed rate or is it a variable rate? If your
Yep.
interest is, if you had a 5-1 arm or something and you're locked in at 3%, but that's going to jump up to 6%, paying that might down might be a good move. It might be one of the best moves you could do with your money, knowing full well that if interest rates drop and you do a refi, you could pull some cash back out if you wanted to, if the world has changed. So that's the whole thing with kind of the drip trickle flow flood. And what we're talking about this is it's really creating a financial model that can work and be adaptable to different people's situations and within other financial models. It doesn't have, just because you're thinking about your drips, trickles, flows, and floods, that can be integrated into essentially any other financial model, because everybody's financial world is different, and not just from what they earn or those things, but just mentally how you think about money. And so I think all that stuff is an important piece. And I mean, we've talked about this with each other and with other people that have come on, is really just having these conversations and thinking about it and being aware is a big step, and just being intentional with what you're doing with your financial world.
And
Knowing your numbers.
knowing those numbers, so much of this comes down to it's just really getting intimate with those numbers and not feeling scared and not putting the blindfold on, which I understand because I was that person and did that a long time ago. So I understand sometimes it can be scary, but when you do it, you immediately feel more confident because you're so aware of what's going on. And like you said, you brought up these very specific things about understanding, are you paying mortgage interest? When does it make sense to pay this off? When doesn't it? And you won't know that unless you know your numbers clear as day. Just getting very intimate with that. And also, if you have a spouse, these are good. This is a good conversation. I think this question that we're tackling on this podcast is actually a good conversation that many couples can sit down and have, right? Because many folks are somewhere along the line of like actively paying down their mortgage. And so what does make sense? Does it make sense to accelerate it, or does it make sense to keep the payments as they are? And how does that factor into their goals and the lifestyle that they want to lead?
Yeah. And if there's listeners out there that have specific questions around this, we've done listener question entire podcast, but we could also do one where we shorter answers on multiple questions of things. So I know sometimes we'll throw out jargon and we try to explain what we're talking about, but if there are specific questions about things, or if there's about your specific situation, and we don't need to share names or anything, but we could certainly discuss a specific situation on the
Yeah,
show.
send us any questions you have about this topic. We are always happy to try to answer, and we definitely can keep your name anonymous and situation anonymous. That's not a problem. So, any other thoughts on this, Tony, as we're coming up on our time?
No, I think we've gone into it. It's really understanding that your situation is unique and it might make perfect sense to pay off your mortgage. And for other people, it might not. And I think that there might be a right answer for your situation, but there's not a universally right answer.
Yeah, that's a good note to leave it on. Not a universal right answer. So if you're hearing a universal right answer from someone or someone claiming to have one, red flag. Get it down and know that you have to make that decision. That's what this is all about, making financial decisions that work for us. So thanks everybody for joining us for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review on your favorite podcast platform so more people can get to know Drip, Trickle, Flow, and Flood. And we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.